Pardon?
The V1 and V2 box.
Yeah, the V1, V2 rocket, having pet names for them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we call them doodlebugs.
Yeah.
And Jerry, the Germans would be Jerry. But, and I noticed in these letters, which my mom had referenced the fact that Jerry had kept her up all night.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just something, I don't know, I think pet names help you cope. It's a coping mechanism. And, but like war is a terrible thing, and it does terrible things to people, and drives wedges in families, and breaks up families, not only through death, but it does it does so much harm, and sometimes you can never get back what you've lost, because it's such a big hole that you can never come back. I often think that I would have liked to have gone back to North Wales sometime in my life and just see it as an adult, because I remember seeing it as a child, and if it was like it was, or did I miss something? But unfortunately, when war ends, all of a sudden I seem to think I remember the war's ending, and then I do remember my mom coming back to North Wales, picking me up and taking me home. Mm-hmm. And I remember too how quickly we got back into the normal life. My friend Maureen came home, and she did not leave with me. That I remember. I think I came home a little earlier than Maureen, because Maureen was with her sisters and brothers, so because she was with a large family, so it took longer for her to come. But once the war was over and we did get back to school, we tried to put our life back together again, and by then the schools were up and running, and there was a grammar school. I do remember there was a choice. You could go to grammar school or a technical school, and I too was really interested in theater. I would have loved to have gone to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, mm-hmm. but it was never a possibility. But I remember having a penchant for that. I always loved the theater, and if there was a school play, I remember trying out for it and see if I could make it. But I did take shorthand typing and bookkeeping. So at the end of the school year, when I was 15, I had a trade. They've already equipped you, and so they get you a job. So they called me into the school office one day and said that there was a newspaper office in London, and it was called Industrial Newspapers, and there was a tobacco and a confectionery bakery magazine, and they would like for me to go and interview. So I remember that, going up on the train, going for the interview, and I think they paid me £3 and 15 shillings a week. So that at that time would be like about $3.50 back then, would be about $3.50 a week. And I did go and get the job, stayed there, and I stayed there up until I married, which was in 1955.
So tell us
April 1955.
Tell us how you met your husband and got here to the U.S.
Okay, well, my girlfriend Maureen and I, we lived next door but one to each other, and of course after the war, when we finally got our life back together, we always wanted to be with each other. And she got a job in London, and she didn't live too far away from where I worked. So anyway, every Sunday afternoon we always have a big dinner, you know, and then we had a television, and then Dad and Mom would sit in front of the chair after the meal, and my dad would doze off, and my mom, her eyes would be starting to close. And I remember telling my friend Maureen, guess what? When I get old, I'm never gonna fall asleep in front of the chair, in front of the fire on a Sunday afternoon. We've always got to do something. So we made a kind of a pact there that we'd always do something. It was Sunday afternoon. So anyway, we were going out to see, we called them the films. You go to the films. So there was this, I think at the time, it was a Danny Kaye. We loved Danny Kaye. It always made us laugh. So anyway, we like to laugh too. Maury and I, we love to laugh. So anyway, we went out to town, and the Danny Kaye movie wasn't playing. I remember it was the Palladium, and it was not playing. So anyway, she said, well, let's go to a dance. And I go, oh, okay. So they have afternoon tea dances. Well, it's like they've got little tables, chairs, and then all the tables are sitting around the room, and the beautiful dance floor, and one of those spinning
disco balls.
And I remember they were playing really nice, dreamy music, and my Maureen and I sitting there talking, and she said something like, don't look now, but there's a couple of American soldiers walking over towards us. And I go, well, look. Anyway, I said, well, what are they like? And I remember saying, well, I'm looking, and one's tall and one isn't, whatever. So anyway, and that's what happened. These two cute American soldiers came over and asked us to dance. And you might say the rest is history, because one of them was my husband, and I met him in the spring of 1953, and that was his first trip to London. He came in to see the sights, and he was on, they call it furlough, and the commanding officer said, you just, after 6 weeks, basic or whatever, they get, you know, indoctrinated around, you know, where the place was, they stayed, and had to get the bearings, and he said he came into town. And because I remember Maureen saying, how did they know how to go to the dance if they didn't know? So, because we thought, well, they had come in before, you know, but apparently that was his first time in. And I really and truthfully do not remember that I had been to an afternoon dance there, and it was just around the corner from where I worked. So anyway, so you might say that was the beginning, and we eventually became engaged 1 year later, and then married in the spring of 55. So I met him spring 53, and we married in 55 in England. And then I came over to America December 24th, 1955, and I came over military MATS. It stands for Military Air Transport Service. That was an army plane, and all the wives of the personnel were flown over. And we had to stop in Labrador for refueling at that time. And I remember I had a real thin coat, because I didn't realize Labrador is really cold. And because I don't remember having a lot of clothes when I came over. I think we had suitcase, but I think it probably came on another plane. I don't remember all these details, but I remember that it was. My husband had bought in the Army PX. He bought an 8mm movie camera, and I think he had taken a movie inside the cockpit of that. And I may still have that. I don't know if I still have that. But anyway, then we landed at Fort McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey. It was December 24th, and I remember getting out the plane and going down the runway, and then into this big place, and there was lots of people, personnel there, and Santa Claus. We called Father Christmas. They were welcoming all the wives of the Americans back home. Welcome back, we're glad you're here. And it was a very emotional time because it was my first time in America, and I didn't know what to expect, but I guess I met Santa Claus, and Santa Claus welcomed me, so
Yeah.
it was good. And then Bob said, we're going to go in the telephone booth, and we're going to call my mom and dad. So I remember them getting through to the number, and they probably wanted to hear my voice because they hadn't heard it, and so I'm sure I sounded much more British, than I am now.
Yeah.
But my sister-in-law tells me that I said something like, "Oh, it's so wonderful to be in America," or something like that. She kind of mimicked what I said. But, of course, I don't remember what I said. But, you're trying to make a good impression on your in-laws. You're just meeting your in-laws. You've never met them before, Because when we were married, my husband's commanding officer was kind enough to stand up for him. In other words, in absentia, you have somebody stand up for you. Because back then you had to have a blood test. I had to go through a battery of tests to make sure that I was fit enough to be come over to America, that I didn't have any communicable diseases. And also, they had to do extensive background checks to make sure I wasn't a communist or have any subversive activities going on in my mother and father's life, I mean, it was, back then, they really did go into your background, and I'm sure they do it now, because I became a citizenship. I got my citizenship in 1978, and they did complete background check on me again, and it took a year and a half to do that, to make sure that you're already living over here. And so I know that anybody that does want to become a citizen, it does take a lot, I mean, it's a lot of research that has to go into it, because it means a lot also. So I'm glad I did it.
Yeah, we're glad you're here.
But thank you.